Welcome to Inspired Caregiver with me, Michelle Magner. This is the podcast where people who are helping out their older family members come for information, tips, and inspiration on how to make their journey easier. Enjoy this episode of Inspired Caregiver. So, welcome to Conversations with Caregivers. Oh, I just blurred my thing. You're my mom.
Hi.
Hey, what's your actual name?
My name is Deborah Ferris, and we are talking about my mother, Merle Ferris, also known as Grandma Ferris to most of the world.
That's right.
So that's why I couldn't be Grandma Ferris.
No, we went with Grammy D for you. And it's worked. It's stuck.
I still sound like a rock star.
Yeah, totally.
People still can't figure out, did I win an award or what exactly? But
Grammy D. Yeah. So yes. For like 7 years off and on, actually, because really you were there for my other grandmother, my paternal grandmother, yes. Your ex-mother-in-law, but yes. You were there for that whole process too.
She finally gave up trying to explain to her housemates who I was. And they said, "Oh, your daughter's so lovely." And she said, "Isn't she?" But I used to go by her place and just say, "Are you taking me to lunch? Or are you going to take me to dinner?" And then we'd go out and try to crowd into her favorite table, which they always...
And that was at the assisted living?
Yes, at assisted living. Yeah. I mean, when she was in her own home, she really didn't want me coming over very much. And I'm not quite sure why, because I had spent many years going into that house. But I think it just was that she, first of all, we know that she wasn't taking her medication properly.
Right.
So we can call this the grandma's interview.
Right.
So I didn't go over very much when she lived at home, but once you made an extreme effort to get her settled in a new place, which was quite an adventure, and belongs in the podcast that I want to do of how do you know when it's time to go.
Yeah, move to assisted living, yeah.
But yeah, when I would go in and I would just, pop in. And I also, in her case, made a chart because she kept saying they didn't give her medication. So gave her a job to do, which was, there was a chart and it had morning, noon, and evening. And she was to mark down when they came in to give her that medication. And it really worked well because...
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, because it was a job. It was something she could take responsibility for.
Well, it makes you feel like you have some control over the...
Right. Yeah. And, it also makes you feel like you're not going crazy when people say, "Well, yes, I did." And you don't remember it. And so if it's written down and you wrote it down, then you can be pretty certain that it happened.
Right.
So there were a number of... No, she actually fared better in her later years than Grandma Ferris. Grandma Mass fared, mentally, even though eventually they both ended up in assisted living.
Yeah.
But yeah, I used to go over there and just pop in on her and we'd have a nice lunch or a nice dinner. Often on a Friday night, I'd go over for dinner and, it was a nice thing. It was a nice thing for me too, because of course I was very close to her.
Yeah.
So,
well, then I think it was like 3 or 4 years later. So one of the reasons I'm excited to have these conversations and record them is that I feel like, having been in the moment, I just don't remember much. It feels pretty blurry because Todd and I were starting our family and kept having the babies. And so like all these things were happening and you were flying in like every 6 to 8 weeks with Grandma Ferris. You were coming back very regularly.
If there was an event, which we will talk about in a moment, then you would call me and say there's been an event, and I would get on a plane and fly in. I was only in New York. It wasn't like when I lived in London and Paris.
Right. A much quicker
Much
flight.
quicker, easier to do, and I had the resources to do it too.
Yeah. So, like, really, is it precipitating event was the peanut butter cracker. Like, I was going over fairly regularly, once a week, to just check in on her at the house.
Yeah, what happened was that when I moved again to New York, and you were the only immediate family that she had, I asked you to go once a week and made some resources available to you to do that. And, you would often take the kids over with you and make lunch. You would take her out for ice cream and all kinds of things. You would plan a lunchtime. And eventually, interestingly, she said, well, you shouldn't have to pay for your own gas. And she actually took over the job of making sure that financially that was available.
Because it was like, she was about 45 minutes from my home.
Yes, it was not, oh, yes, one Thanksgiving when she was already, well, no, it was Christmas, actually, her last Christmas out. Yes, I spent 45 minutes driving over, throwing her wheelchair in the back, hiking her in, and then driving back to your place where we had a nice lasagna, which is my go-to holiday meal if we don't know what time it's going to happen. And she spent the day. It was a beautiful day. And, she was really happy about the dog and, because she thought of it as her dog.
Yeah, Zoe.
Yeah. Zoe. And she spent a lot longer than I expected her to. And then 45 minutes drive back over, get her settled, and then a 45-minute drive back.
Yeah.
I mean, my favorite story about the dog and my sister and myself going to visit her was driving 45 minutes over there with the dog so that she could see the dog when she was in skilled nursing. And basically getting in there, I settle into my chair. She's laying on the bed. Aunt Karen is sitting in her chair, and the dog lays down on the floor and goes to sleep. And I'm saying a few things because I always recommend going with a monologue.
Oh, that's such a good idea. Like when you go to visit someone, like have some rehearsed things you're going to talk about.
Yeah, and take photos or whatever. So I took a bunch of stuff and whatever, and I took the dog and I took my sister, her daughter. So I thought that should be enough to keep things going. I looked over and the dog was asleep, Karen was asleep, and Grandma Ferris was asleep. And this I'm telling you, within, I would say 5 minutes of my getting there, 5 minutes of my getting there. And so I'm looking around the room and talking to myself, and I just said, okay, time to go, get everybody up. It's like, oh, great visit, and my point is this. Nobody remembers.
Yeah.
So do what's right for you,
Yeah.
Go over there, make the effort as much for yourself as for anybody else to spend a little time, and it doesn't have to be a long time because Grandma Ferris, who was a very talkative woman, ran out of words.
Wow.
As you may recall, because you were going in and seeing her all the time. She couldn't put a sentence together. She could not. Happy to see us, happy to see anybody who came in, but there was no talking.
Yeah.
Didn't talk anymore. And, my piece of advice is, plan a monologue. But be there for the person, show them old pictures, because that's often when they reach a certain stage, that's often what they remember. You know, you may not even know the people in the album,
Right.
but they'll remember it. Or I take out my phone. I would show her pictures on my phone of trees or whatever, you know, just whatever, just a dialogue. I don't even know how much came through. She was very attentive, but you know, but yeah, you were going over there, and one day you called me. I was on a trip to Florida, and she was not eating. She was not getting up off the couch.
I call this the peanut butter cracker phase.
Yes.
Because I think that's when I came in and she had the TV tray and the jar of peanut butter with the knife in it and a sleeve of like saltine crackers. And I'm like, what's going on in here?
All this meal. So yeah, and you called me. I was on a business trip to Florida, and I saw it was you on the phone. So I stepped out of my meeting, and you said, "My goodness, how did I get so bright? Oh, I'm on my way over, and this is what I'm gonna do," which is very smart of you. You said, if she won't get up and join me at the table for lunch, I'm calling the ambulance.
Mm.
Now you wouldn't want to
Yeah,
do
smart.
everything, but you know, but basically we were going through a phase where she was having a lot of trouble with her back.
Yeah.
And so 10 minutes later, I say, excuse myself from the meeting because I see it's you on the phone. And you say, guess what I'm doing now? I'm tracking the ambulance back to the hospital. And I said, so what happened? And you said she got up, came over to the table, looked at the food, and turned around and said, I'll come back and eat in a minute.
Mm.
Come back in a little bit. And you said, I told you, if you don't come and sit here, you're going to the hospital. Because she had back troubles.
Right.
She had osteoarthritis in her spine. So you said that she went quite happily, because what we all know about Grandma Ferris is that she loved young men.
She sure did.
I loved her too.
Yeah.
So, you said there were these big strapping young men who came in to get her, and she was smiling and happy as she could be.
Yeah.
That was the last time before she moved, but before we had to move her.
And usually, just based on my experience with that experience and then working with families, is you get so used to you sort of adapt, right? So you think, well, that's just what she does. She just sits on the couch and that's where she's eating now, and so you become really comfortable in whatever the current circumstances are. But really, they're experiencing a decline, or medical intervention can make them feel better.
Yes.
Because obviously, after that, I mean, and honestly, all of us should be hooked up to a bag of IV fluid once a month, I think.
Well, everybody can do with hydrating. I learned that with cats. But, but basically, most people are not hydrating properly, which is affecting their memory, among other things. Though she drank a lot of water, but she was on medication that I think affected her body's ability to actually process a lot of things, possibly.
Yeah.
So she always felt thirsty, and but no, in that particular case, you got her to the hospital and they admitted her, and they basically said she's going to be here for an extended period of time.
Right.
You and I had already looked for places for her to go, but we couldn't get her agreement, so we couldn't get her on a list, as you may recall.
Yes.
I had, again, for the sake of the audience, I had 3 siblings, and they really were quite willing to let you and me, when I was available, do all of the work regarding Grandma Ferris. because they couldn't accept her aging in some cases. And Karen was terrified that Grandma Ferris was going to forget who she was.
Mm.
And, and Terry felt uncomfortable trying to communicate. And Sarah Jo also felt, my sister Sarah Jo also felt uncomfortable because she didn't talk anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that is something that I think people have to be prepared for.
Well, and it's a scenario of you have a very willing participant, because Grandma Ferris was like a second mom to me. I mean, I live geographically closer to her than anybody else, my whole life at that point. And so you have a very willing participant, and then you've got varying degrees of people's acceptance and then willingness. And it's so much harder when it's your own parent
Yes.
versus
Yeah.
someone else in the community. It's so much harder to accept that. But
and I think that just that it's a very important for the relationship between the caregiver who's a family member,
mm-hmm.
And the person that we all start accepting them the way they are. And so that you are willing to accept the idea that they're not going to communicate the way they used to.
Right.
Yeah. And
I think it helps when you skip a generation too.
Yeah, there's not to be the interaction. Yeah, because for certain, I'm going to say with my sister Sarah Jo, who, as you know, developed Lewy body dementia, which is, I really thought for a while they were going to share a room and introduce each other every month, but that didn't happen.
Yeah.
We knew long before we got a diagnosis that there was something wrong with her. But they would say, Mom doesn't want to do that, or, oh, we'll just wait until she wants to do that. I mean, and even in one case where she was in the ordering around mode, which we know so well, she had ordered Karen and me to pick up a plant that had just been watered, a tree, and carry it up to a landing where it shouldn't have been anyway. And I refused. And Karen was just like, no, we have to do this. She asked us to do it. I said, look, I'm the only one earning a living in this mess. If I'm out on disability, we're not going to have the resources to do many of the things that we're going to need to do. We're going to get one of the neighborhood boys to do it. But for my mom, Grandma Ferris, well, it was important to her somehow that her children, will still be under her guidance or control, or
right.
That she would still be able to tell you what to do and you would do it. But it's one of those things, you have to take care of yourself in this process. And in one case, you were pregnant with Logan, and she wanted you to, she had a bunch of baskets that were way out of reach without a ladder. And she wanted you to get a ladder, put it up, reach in, see what was in the basket. Not that she wanted what was in the basket.
Just see what's in there. I've been looking at those baskets.
I'm looking at those baskets and I want to know what's in them. And then you would have had to put them back up. And finally you said, no, I'm not going to do that. And it's hard not to get upset, right? I mean, everybody gets upset. Then everybody gets upset.
Right. Because then you feel guilty and bad and
always, done all the ridiculous things she's asked me to do in the past. And, so, and one time I went over, this is when I moved back to Kansas City for a brief period of time to work after 9/11. I decided every Thursday I would go over from work and for dinner and get her set up, like that. And so that way I could keep an eye on what was going on too.
Right.
But one time I went over to cook dinner, and Karen was living there at that point. And I always got a movie too, so we could have an evening together.
Yeah.
But after dinner, they both went off. Karen went off to watch her nature programs, and Grandma Ferris went off to her computer.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm like, my work here is done.
Yeah, guess I'm leaving.
I need to go back to my cats now.
Yeah. So I think that's so important because you went in prepared, but kind of with minimal expectation.
Yeah, you have to pivot, and it's
And
just like,
pivot.
and believe me, my first response was not, oh, okay. It was like, we had this plan. It was a plan, and I'm like, I like to plan, and it's not happening. But then I finally got a hold of myself and said,
Yeah.
this is not working out, the way I expected it. I mean, even getting people to the table was not easy that night, I remember.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, in 2020, we're learning how to pivot.
We sure are. We're getting lots of good practice.
Yeah.
Well, let's hit pause because I think you've given some great advice in this first round. And so you talked about like when you go to visit someone in a facility, which right now we know is complicated or not happening, but it's going to happen. So just have pictures, be prepared.
When you're visiting them in their home.
Yes, or visiting in their home, right?
Yeah, it doesn't matter where they are. If they've stopped talking, and they don't necessarily know what's going on in the world.
Right, good point. So be prepared, be willing to pivot, have some, be willing to be flexible within the visit. So you did all that work, you drove all over the place, you showed up 5 minutes later, you're like, well, time to go. But you weren't
done. Yeah.
You weren't mad, you're just like,
no, in that case, definitely not mad and not worried about having spent an hour and a half in transportation.
Right.
Sometimes it goes differently. Sometimes you go for a coffee and, and it's a whole thing and whatever. But no, yeah. Just let it go. Let it go.
Let it go.
Is not, you're not the same person you were when you were 13 years old. Your mother is not the same person she was at 50, 60, 70,
yeah.
The same person.
So good.
Yeah. I mean, there's some of that person left there, but, it's like, I think music is a good thing to bring too.
Okay, hit pause.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that in the next episode.
Yeah, I've got lots of notes here.
All right. Well, thank you. Don't go away.
I'll be here.
All right.